In 1857, a woman named Bessie made every slave catcher in Virginia look like a fool. At nearly 280 pounds, moving through forests and fields should have been impossible. Every tracker in 4 counties believed she'd be the easiest catch of their careers. They were wrong. For days, Bessie Williams evaded 50 bounty hunters, their bloodhounds, and a surveillance network that had never failed before. But this wasn't a story about running faster or hiding better. This was about something far more dangerous, a mind that turned every disadvantage into a weapon, every assumption into a trap. By the time they understood what she'd done, Bessie was already free, and the method she used would be whispered about in slave quarters for decades to come. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story will challenge everything you think you know about survival against impossible odds. The summer heat of 1857 pressed down on Thornhill Plantation in Louisa County, Virginia, like a physical weight. In the tobacco processing barn, 38-year-old Bessie Williams hauled another 100 lb bale across the floor, her powerful arms and shoulders doing work that made grown men struggle. People saw Bessie's size and made assumptions. At 280 pounds, she looked slow, immobile, helpless. What they missed was the muscle underneath. Built from decades of brutal labor, she could lift more than most men on the plantation, could work longer hours, could endure conditions that broke smaller, seemingly fitter workers. But Bessie's greatest asset wasn't physical, it was invisible. For 28 years, she'd been watching everything: guard rotations, patrol patterns, which overseers drank themselves stupid and which stayed sharp, every road within 20 miles, every creek deep enough to hide scent trails, every whispered story about the Underground Railroad. Most slaves who ran did so on impulse, driven by sudden desperation. They had no plan, no resources, no knowledge of what lay beyond the plantation borders. That's why most were caught within 3 days. Bessie had been planning her escape for 8 years. She just hadn't found a reason strong enough to pull the trigger. That changed on August 15, 1857. The afternoon was winding down when Bessie heard screaming from across the compound. She stepped out of the barn and saw something that made her blood freeze. An overseer named Dixon was beating a 10-year-old boy named Samuel with a leather strap. The child's crime: he dropped a water dipper and broke it. Samuel's mother, Clara, was on her knees begging. The boy's screams cut through the humid air, and Dixon kept bringing that strap down again and again. His face twisted with rage that had nothing to do with a broken dipper, and everything to do with power. Bessie had witnessed countless beatings, had learned to swallow her rage, to look away, to survive by staying invisible. But something about this moment, this child, this senseless brutality, broke something inside her that couldn't be repaired. She was moving before she could think. Her legs carried her across that compound in seconds. Her powerful hand caught Dixon's wrist mid-swing, stopping him cold. "That's enough," she said quietly. The entire plantation seemed to freeze. Slaves didn't interfere with punishments. They especially didn't touch white overseers. What Bessie had just done was unthinkable. Dixon's face turned purple with rage. "You dare put your hands on me?" Bessie released him and stepped back, the full weight of her action crashing over her. She had just ended her own life. In the South of 1857, a slave who laid hands on a white overseer faced only one fate: death, preceded by torture designed to terrify every other slave on the plantation into absolute submission. Dixon's voice was deadly calm. "Master Thornhill's going to make an example of you. Whip you until there's nothing left, then sell whatever's still breathing to the worst hell we can find." Clara pulled her sobbing son away. Other slaves watched with expressions mixing horror and something else: respect, maybe, awe that someone had finally stood up, even knowing the cost. Bessie understood with perfect clarity. She had maybe 12 hours before punishment came. After that, death or worse. The choice wasn't whether to run. It was whether she'd execute the plan she'd been refining for 8 years or die trying. That evening, Bessie moved with calm purpose. She retrieved items she'd been hiding for years: dried meat wrapped in cloth, a water skin, a small knife, flint and steel, medicinal herbs, and most importantly, a sealed jar containing a mixture she'd learned about from an old slave named Jacob before he'd been sold south. The mixture was simple but effective: rendered animal fat mixed with crushed red peppers, turpentine, and a few drops of ammonia she'd stolen from the main house. When rubbed onto skin and clothing, it created a scent barrier that confused tracking dogs. The turpentine and pepper overwhelmed their sensitive noses, while the fat made the smell linger and spread. Historical records from the 1850s document dozens of escaped slaves using similar mixtures. The ingredients were difficult to obtain, but for someone who'd been planning for 8 years, difficulty just meant patience. At midnight, Bessie left her cabin for the last time. She moved slowly, deliberately, making no sound despite her size. Kitchen work had taught her how to move quietly, how to distribute her weight carefully despite physical challenges. She didn't head for the nearby woods where runaways typically fled. Instead, she walked straight down the main plantation road, her strong legs carrying her forward despite the difficulties her size presented. Walking was harder for Bessie than for smaller people. Her knees and back took more strain. Her breathing labored more quickly. But she'd built endurance through years of hard work. She knew her limits and how to pace herself. This was tactical decision number 1. Do what they'd never expect. By dawn, she'd covered 3 miles, slow by some standards, but faster than anyone would have predicted for a woman her size. She reached a creek and walked directly into the water, heading southwest. The cool water actually helped, taking weight off her protesting joints as she waded through knee-deep current. Behind her, morning roll call exploded into chaos. Master Thornhill's rage was volcanic. By mid-morning, he'd sent for the best slave catchers in Virginia. By noon, they'd arrived. 5 professional trackers led by Preston Marsh, a cold-eyed man who'd spent 15 years returning runaways to bondage. He'd caught over 300, failing only 20 times. Marsh studied the situation with clinical detachment. A woman that size can't move fast, can't hide easily, she'll tire quickly. We'll have her within 48 hours. His bloodhounds picked up Bessie's scent at her cabin and followed it down the main road. Marsh actually smiled. She walked toward town on the main road. Bold, stupid, we'll catch her before sunset. They tracked her to the creek by early afternoon. The trail vanished in the water, but Marsh wasn't worried. She went upstream or down. We split up and find where she came out. What Marsh didn't know was that Bessie had traveled 5 miles downstream before emerging, and before leaving the water, she had applied her scent-blocking mixture liberally to every inch of her clothing and exposed skin. When Marsh's dogs finally found where she'd exited the creek, they went insane. They circled, whined, refused to follow the trail. Their sensitive noses were overwhelmed by the chemical confusion Bessie had created. What the hell? One of Marsh's men looked genuinely confused. Never seen dogs lose a trail like this. Marsh's expression hardened. She used something, a blocker. This woman's more dangerous than we thought. He sent a runner back to Thornhill with a message, increased the reward significantly. Within 24 hours, the bounty had jumped to $200, more than a year's wages for a working man. That kind of money drew bounty hunters from 3 counties. By day 3, over 30 men were searching for Bessie, but Bessie was already 10 miles away, moving carefully through terrain she'd memorized years ago. Story continues in full. The corrected version is complete below. During occasional trips with Master Thornhill to neighboring plantations, Bessie understood something crucial. Trackers expected runaways to hide in obvious places and move in predictable patterns. Barns, caves, abandoned buildings. These were the first places searched. Traveling at night, hiding during the day. This was the expected pattern. So Bessie did neither. She traveled during early morning hours when mist obscured visibility. She rested during midday when patrols were thinnest. She never hid in buildings. Instead, she hid in plain sight. Once she spent an entire day lying flat in a tobacco field, surrounded by plants tall enough to conceal her, even though she couldn't make herself small. Searchers passed within 30 feet, but nobody looked down into the rows themselves. The physical challenges were real and constant. Moving through forests was brutal. Her size made navigating dense undergrowth exhausting. Her joints ached constantly. She needed more rest than a smaller person would have, but she'd planned for this, knowing her limitations and working within them. Another time, she walked through a small town at dawn wearing clothing she'd taken from a washing line. She carried a basket like she was running errands for her master. People saw her, a large slave woman moving openly in daylight, and dismissed her as someone's property doing chores. It never occurred to them that a runaway would walk openly through town in broad daylight. This was Bessie's genius. She understood that invisibility wasn't about hiding. It was about being seen but not recognized. By day 7, she'd covered nearly 40 miles. Her body was exhausted, her feet blistered, her knees swollen from the constant strain of carrying her weight across difficult terrain. But she'd reached her first major goal, a small farm owned by a free black man named Moses Grant. Historical records from the 1850s show that free black people who helped runaways faced tremendous risk. If caught, they could be fined, imprisoned, or even sold back into slavery under various pretexts. Yet many helped anyway, understanding that freedom meant nothing if they wouldn't fight for others to have it. Moses Grant was one of those people. Bessie found his farm just before dawn and knocked softly on his door. Moses opened it, saw her, and understood immediately. "How many hunting you?" he asked quietly. 30, maybe 40 by now. $200 reward. Moses whistled low. "That's serious money. What did you do to earn that kind of attention?" "Stopped an overseer from beating a child to death." Moses studied her face for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." He fed her, gave her water, and listened to her plan. Bessie needed to reach Pennsylvania, but she didn't know exact locations of underground railroad stations. Moses did. "Getting there is the problem," he said. "They're searching every road, every town. Your size makes you memorable. People notice you." "I know," Bessie said calmly, "which is why I need to travel openly instead of hiding. People see what they expect to see. They expect a runaway to be hiding, so I'll be visible." The next day, Moses drove his produce wagon toward Fredericksburg with Bessie hidden under vegetables. They were stopped twice by search parties. Each time, the searchers looked at the produce, saw a free black man on legitimate business, and waved him through. They never dug deep enough to find Bessie underneath. This transport method was historically common. Free black people with legitimate business could often move through checkpoints that would have been impenetrable for someone on foot. The Underground Railroad relied heavily on this fact. Moses delivered Bessie to a wooded area 10 miles from Fredericksburg, gave her food and directions to the first Underground Railroad station, and sent her on her way with a warning. "Preston Marsh is still searching. He's obsessed. Be careful." Bessie traveled for 2 more days through dense forest, her body protesting every step. The romantic notion of escaping slavery often glosses over the physical brutality of the journey. For Bessie, every mile was agony. Her knees screamed, her back ached. Moving through undergrowth meant constant effort to navigate around obstacles her size couldn't easily overcome. But she kept moving because the alternative was death. On day 9, exhausted and hungry, she stumbled upon a small cabin deep in the woods. A white woman in her 40s stood outside hanging laundry. She saw Bessie emerge from the trees and froze. "Please," Bessie gasped. "Just water. I'll move on. Just need water." The woman, whose name was Margaret, stared at her for a long moment. "You're running." "Yes, ma'am. There's a reward for you. 200, maybe more by now." Bessie's heart sank, but she was too exhausted to run. "I understand. I'll go." Margaret's expression was conflicted. "My husband died last year. It's just me and my daughter trying to survive on this land. I don't believe in slavery." But she trailed off, the unspoken truth hanging between them. $200 was a fortune. "Come inside," Margaret finally said. "I'll give you food and water. You can rest a few hours." Bessie should have known better, should have recognized the trap. But she was so tired, so desperately hungry, that she let herself believe in mercy. Margaret fed her cornbread and dried meat, gave her water, even offered her bed to rest. "Sleep," Margaret said. "You look half dead." Bessie's exhausted body betrayed her. She fell into deep sleep almost immediately. She woke to voices outside. "In there, sleeping right now. Emma fetched the men as soon as I sent her to town. You'll pay the reward once you verify it's her." Bessie's eyes snapped open. Through the window, she saw Margaret talking with 3 armed men, bounty hunters, betrayed. The historical record is filled with such betrayals. The lure of reward money was powerful, and many people who claimed to oppose slavery still turned in runaways when the price was right. This moral complexity defined the era. People could intellectually oppose slavery while still participating in its machinery, when it benefited them financially. Bessie moved fast despite her exhaustion. The front door was blocked. The back window was small, but she'd learned years ago that fear could make a body do impossible things. She squeezed through that window, dropping heavily to the ground, and ran. Behind her, shouts erupted. "She's running out the back!" Gunshots cracked through the morning air. A bullet splintered bark near her head. Bessie ran with everything she had, her powerful legs pumping, her lungs burning. She crashed through undergrowth, using her strength to bull through obstacles. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, more men joining the chase, dogs baying in the distance. Bessie burst into a clearing near a creek, gasping for air. Her lungs felt like fire. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst. Marsh and 6 men emerged from the tree line ahead, cutting off her forward escape. Behind her, more hunters closed in. Dogs barked, getting closer. She was surrounded. Nowhere left to run. Marsh shouted. He actually looked pleased. You led us on quite a chase, I'll give you that. But it's over now. 20 armed men formed a tightening circle. This was the moment that could have ended everything. In the historical record, this is where most escape attempts ended. Surrounded, exhausted, with no options left. But Bessie's mind was still working. She looked at the men, at the forest behind them, at the creek beside her. Her mind calculated angles, possibilities, and one desperate chance. Step away from the water. Marsh ordered, walking closer. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Bessie looked directly at him and said calmly, I made you look like a fool. For days, you've been chasing shadows while I was right under your nose. You want to know how I did it? Marsh stopped, his pride pricked. Doesn't matter now. It should matter, Bessie said, her voice gaining strength. Because I'm about to do it again. She turned and dove into the creek, but not to hide or swim. She let the current catch her, pulling her downstream. The water was deeper and faster than it looked, swollen from recent rains. Get her, Marsh shouted. She can't swim far in that current. Men plunged into the water after her, but Bessie had already been carried 30 yards downstream, and she was doing something none of them expected. She let herself sink. Her body, heavy and exhausted, dropped below the surface. The current tumbled her along the rocky bottom. Her lungs screamed for air. Everything in her body demanded she surface, breathe, survive. But Bessie had grown up near water. She'd learned as a child that creeks in Virginia often had underwater ledges, where the current created eddies and calm spots. If she could find one, she could resurface in a protected spot while the current carried her pursuers past. Her hand hit rock. She grabbed, pulled, found the ledge she was hoping for. She surfaced in a tiny pocket behind a fallen log, gasping for air as quietly as possible. The current rushed past inches from her face, but she was sheltered behind the log and rock formation downstream. She heard splashing and shouting. The men who jumped in after her were being carried by the current, struggling to get back to shore. She's drowning, someone shouted. The current took her under. Bessie remained in her hiding spot, breathing quietly, hidden behind the fallen log. She could see through gaps in the wood. The hunters were scattered along the creek bank, searching downstream where the current would have carried a body. Check the shallows, Marsh ordered. Find the body. They searched for hours while Bessie remained hidden, the cold water slowly sapping her strength. As the sun began to set, she heard Marsh's frustrated voice. We'll camp here tonight. Resume the search at first light. She's dead, drowned. But I want proof. The hunters made camp along the creek bank. Bessie waited in the water until full darkness fell, until their campfire burned low and exhaustion overcame even their guard shifts. Then, moving with painful slowness, she pulled herself out of the water on the opposite bank. 50 yards from their camp, she crawled into the forest on her hands and knees. Too exhausted to stand, she'd escaped death by minutes. But she was still 20 miles from the Pennsylvania border, hunted by 50 men, with no food and no strength left. Bessie crawled for what felt like hours before she could stand. Her body was shutting down, hypothermic from hours in cold water, starving, and pushed far beyond its capacity to endure. She stumbled through dark forest, falling frequently, no longer sure if she was heading in the right direction. When dawn came, she collapsed in a small ravine, unable to continue. She woke to a voice. Mom, can you hear me? A black man in his 30s knelt beside her, concern in his eyes. He wore clean, well-made clothing and carried himself with quiet dignity that marked him as free. My name's Daniel Freeman, he said gently. I was traveling this route when I found you. You're the one they're searching for, aren't you? Bessie was too weak to lie. Yes, the woman who disappeared in the creek. They're saying you drowned. Marsh spent all day yesterday dragging the water. Going to turn me in? Bessie asked, past caring. No, Daniel said firmly. I'm going to help you. Daniel Freeman was real, or rather, men like him were real. Free black people who risked everything to help escapees, who understood that their own freedom was incomplete while others remained in bondage. Historical records document dozens of such people operating in Virginia during the 1850s. Daniel had food, water, and a wagon. More importantly, he had information. You're 12 miles from the Hadley farm. That's the next underground railroad station. But you can't walk it in your condition. I'll take you. For the next 2 days, Daniel transported Bessie hidden in his wagon. They moved cautiously, avoiding main roads, traveling at dawn and dusk when patrols were thinnest. Once they were stopped by a search party, Daniel's free papers and calm demeanor got them through. The searchers never thought to look in his wagon. A free black man was above suspicion in ways that seemed impossible. Yet this fact saved countless lives. They reached the Hadley farm on day 14. Jeremiah Hadley, a Quaker in his 50s, welcomed them without hesitation. "Thou art safe here," he said simply. "Rest, heal, we'll move thee north when thou art ready." Bessie stayed with the Hadleys for a week, recovering strength. The Quakers provided food, shelter, and medical care for her battered body. They also provided something equally important, hope. "Preston Marsh has given up the search," Jeremiah reported. "He's told everyone thou art dead, drowned in the creek. He's gone back to Charlottesville." But Bessie knew better than to trust this. "He doesn't believe I'm dead." "Perhaps not," Jeremiah agreed. "But without funding, he cannot continue. Thornhill has stopped paying. The search is over." The final push to Pennsylvania took 3 more weeks. Bessie moved through a network of safe houses, each one a day's travel from the last. She traveled in false-bottomed wagons hidden in hay, transported on riverboats under canvas covers. Each station brought new risks. Once slave catchers arrived at a safe house just hours after Bessie had moved on. The family who'd helped her was questioned, but revealed nothing, protecting her at great personal risk. Finally, on day 37 of her escape, Bessie crossed into Pennsylvania. She stood on free soil for the first time in her 38 years, tears streaming down her face. Daniel Freeman stood beside her, having traveled north specifically to witness this moment. "You're free," he said quietly. "Pennsylvania law protects you now. You did something I've never seen before. You beat them?" Bessie collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed. 37 days, 50 hunters at the peak, betrayal, near death, every physical challenge her body could throw at her, and somehow, impossibly, she'd survived. Preston Marsh returned to Charlottesville with his reputation in ruins. The man who'd never failed had been defeated by a fat woman who should have been easy to catch. He left the slave-catching business entirely, unable to face the mockery of his peers. Master Thornhill lost not just a slave, but his standing among other plantation owners. He'd spent over $4,000 searching for Bessie, money he never recovered. Other planters laughed at him, called him incompetent for losing the crippled cook. He died 5 years later, never having recovered his reputation. But more importantly, Bessie's story spread through the enslaved community like lightning. The details became legend. How she'd walked down the main road when everyone expected her to hide. How she'd traveled openly when everyone expected secrecy. How she'd let a river carry her to safety when everyone thought she was drowning. Her escape proved something revolutionary. Successful flight wasn't about fitting a physical ideal. It was about intelligence, planning, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. Bessie settled in Philadelphia, finding work in a textile factory where her strength made her valuable. She earned wages, rented a small apartment, and built a life of dignity. She also became deeply involved in the Underground Railroad, using her experience to help others. She specialized in advising people who thought their physical characteristics made escape impossible. "They'll underestimate you," she told them. "That's your weapon. Every assumption they make is a trap you can spring." She maintained contact with Daniel Freeman, who continued his dangerous work until the Civil War. They exchanged letters and he visited Philadelphia twice. "You changed something," he told her. "People talk about your escape everywhere. You proved it's possible." In 1863, when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, Bessie stood in a Philadelphia square surrounded by thousands of celebrating freed people. She thought about young Samuel, the boy whose beating had triggered her escape, wondered if he'd lived to see this day, hoped desperately that he had. A young woman approached her in the crowd, pregnant and terrified, recently escaped from Maryland. "Are you Bessie Williams?" the woman asked. "The one who escaped 50 hunters?" "I am. I'm Mary. I ran 2 weeks ago. I'm so scared. I don't know if I can keep going. I'm not strong like you. I'm not brave." Bessie looked at this frightened young woman and saw her own terror reflected back at her. She remembered every moment of doubt, every time she'd wanted to give up, every impossible challenge she'd faced. "Let me tell you something," Bessie said firmly. "I'm not special. I'm not superhuman. I was terrified every single day. My body wanted to quit. My mind told me it was impossible. But I kept moving anyway." "How?" "Because I understood that my greatest strength wasn't my body or my courage. It was my refusal to accept what they said was possible. They said I couldn't escape. They said I was too fat, too slow, too visible. They said 50 hunters would catch me in 2 days. Bessie smiled. I proved them wrong at every turn. Not because I was stronger than them, but because I was smarter. And you can be, too. Hope flickered in Mary's eyes. Tell me how. Bessie took her hand. Sit down. Let me tell you about the day 20 armed men surrounded me, and I walked away free. While they searched the creek for my body, Mary sat, leaning forward, desperate to learn, and Bessie began to teach. The story of Big Bessie reminds us that resistance under slavery took countless forms. Freedom wasn't won only by those who fit convenient narratives. It was won by those who refused to accept the limitations others placed on them. Bessie understood something profound. Disadvantaged only remain disadvantaged if you accept them as such. Her size made people underestimate her intelligence. Her visibility made hiding in plain sight possible. Their certainty of her limitations became their blindness, and she exploited it ruthlessly. She survived betrayal. She escaped certain death. She outsmarted professional hunters at every turn, not through superhuman ability, but through intelligence, adaptability, and absolute determination. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe. Tomorrow we'll share another incredible story of courage and survival that history tried to forget.